Things first, the title is The Murder of Zecharia. And the Zecharia we're talking about is not the author of the book in Treyasar. That's the first thing. It's different Zecharia. The Zecharia we're talking about tonight lived 200 years before the destruction of the temple during the reign of Yoash. Reign of Yoash, I saw a listing that is basically 836 to 798 BCE. So that's the end of the 9th century, beginning of the 8th century, before the current counting. You have to remember, the numbers are going backwards when you talk about that. That's the first thing. Second thing is that normally in one's education, let's say through high school, even where there is a vigorous program of Tanakh, one doesn't study this story at all. Why? Because it's not in Malachim Beis. It's tucked away in Divrei Hayamim Beis. And nobody bothers and teaches it. Maybe if you're lucky, a teacher might reference it, okay? Anybody who knows about the story, most probably studied it on Tisha B'Av, when they studied the Gemara in Gittin, that describes all the stories related to the Churbanot of the two Batei Mikdash. Basically, that's how one knows about this particular story. Moreover, there is a kina that we say on Tisha B'Av, written by Yehuda Halevi. It pays to talk a little about this because this is the quality of the Hebrew is one of the most accessible poems that we say on Tisha B'Av. So it pays to try and understand it and appreciate it. Okay, and give it a little depth. Okay, the setting for the story is as follows. Setting of the story is that we're in the reign of Yoash. And from the time he was a little infant until later on in his life, he was under the tutelage of the Yehoyada HaKohen HaGadol. And all was well. In fact, we read about Yoash on the Haftorah of Parsha Shkolim, because he's the one that renovated the Beis HaMikdash under Yehoyada's guidance. However, when he died, his advisors started playing up to him, and pretty soon, all of a sudden, there was a certain amount of abandonment of the Beis HaMikdash and the introduction of idol worship in Yerushalayim. And at a key point, the son of Yehoyada, Zecharia, ben Yehoyada HaKohen, got up and was enveloped by the Spirit of God, and he castigated the people for having abandoned God in the Beis HaMikdash. Well, apparently the ramifications were greater because ultimately a plot was hatched against him under the orders of the king Yoash, and he was killed b'chatzar Beis Hashem. And as it says in the Divrei Hayamim Beis, the conclusion of the story is, Uchemoso Omar, his last breath, he said, Yera Adonai v'yidrosh. God should see and demand an accounting of this murder. Okay. All right. So let me put up the share. Let me put up the screen here. Okay. So I wanted to rather keep it short about the Divrei Hayamim, and we'll start with the Gemara in Gittin. Gemara starts that even though we said who destroyed the Mikdash, the actual general who came in and executed all the law, everything he was supposed to do, was Nebuzaradan. I mean, I'm still my head is still in the yeshiva, so I'll say Nebuzaradan, but you'll forgive me. So let's read the Gemara. I think I have the translation on page 6 of the Gemara because it's heavy Aramaic, so you might be more comfortable with that. Okay. Ashkeche ledome de Zecharia. He found when he came into the Beis HaMikdash, there's the blood of Zecharia. This is over 200 years later. The Hava Kormirsach Vasolit. It's sort of bubbling, simmering, and rising up from the ground. Amar my high, he said, what is this? Amrle dam zvachim dishtapuch, blood from sacrifices that is on the ground. And they tried to pass it off as blood that just had been slaughtered right before he came in. So that's why it was loose and liquidy. So what did he do? He's no fool. Icy dummy. He slaughtered other animals to bring samples of blood. Below Idamu, they didn't match. The human blood was quite different from animal blood. Omar Lahu, so Navazaradan said to the people in the Beis HaMikdash, Iamriti li muto. You tell me what's going on, that's fine. V'ilav masrikina lebesaraychu b'misriki deparzali. I'm going to end up combing your flesh with iron combs if you don't tell me what's going on. So now the people in the Beis HaMikdash answered him. Amri, they said to him, my name Malach, what can we tell you? Neviah Havabon, we had a prophet among us, the Hava Kamucha Chlam b'milei d'shmaya, that who used to rebuke us in heavenly matters. Kamina Naluya, we ganged up against him, we killed him. V'hokama shnin, and it's now many years, the lokanayach dame, that his blood doesn't rest. So Amalahu, so he said, I know mafais nole. I will appease the blood of Zecharia. What'd he do? I see Sanhedri Gedola with Sanhedri Katana. He brought the highest court in the country, the Sanhedrin, and the lower courts in the country. Namely, he's saying if the blood of an innocent man is laying there all these years and not taken care of, it's a problem of the justice. Hallelujah. He killed them all. Below Nach, and the blood still does not rest. The blood is still simmering. Well, now he tries the other end of the spectrum. He now killed young men and young women who obviously are not involved in the corruption of the country, and he killed them, and still the blood is not resting. I see Tanoko Shabes Rabban. He brought the little children beginning to study Torah, namely in the imagery of Chazal. This reflects the study of Torah at its purest level. Namely, it's not an older person that has already been compromised one way or another in life, no matter how small. He started killing these children, and the blood is still simmering. All of a sudden, Zecharia, Nevuzaradan is really overwhelmed by all of this slaughter, and he speaks to the blood. The blood has now been invested with the persona of Zecharia himself. Amalei, Zecharia, told him Shebeheni Banitim. I already got rid of the cream of the crop of the best part of the whole nation. Do you really want me to wipe all of them out? Once he said that, the blood settled. So what's the conclusion? He shot at that moment. Here, tshuva bedate. Nevuzaradan had a moment's reflection of tshuva. Omar, ma'im al nefesh achas kach. If one innocent blood is shed, the price is in the slaughter of these many people. Hahu Gavra, that guy, maybe he's talking about himself. The Kotal Kohani Nishmasha, the one who actually killed all of these people. Alachas Kama Vachama, who's going to actually, all of these people were basically innocent. Arak, he ran away. Ozal Shada Shtar Pratzel Bevese, he sent a letter to his house, giving instructions to his family, his properties, and he became a Ger Tzedek. And that's the Gemara in Gittin. Okay, that's the Gemara in Gittin. Turns out this excerpt from the Gemara in Gittin is actually an excerpt from a larger story that's told in Sanhedrin. Only when I was researching this thing did I actually studied the story in Sanhedrin and Perichelek. Okay, but this is the part that everybody knows, and that it's a Maseches Gittin. So the first question is, where does all of this come from? Is it simply manufactured from nothing? Well, let's see. In Eichel, we read two verses. Re'ei Adonai v'habita l'mi'ol altako. Yirmiyahu, the prophet, the author of Eichel, is saying, look at God, look what you have actually done. Im tochalna noshim priyam ololei tipuchim. Is it conceivable that women will actually kill their own children in order to eat their flesh? Is it conceivable that in the Mikdash Hashem correct? In Beis Hashem, there will actually, a sacrilege will take place, that the enemy will come in and actually kill off a Kohen V'Navi, that the house itself will not protect itself. And then he turns to the larger, I'm talking in terms of Pshat now, he turns to the larger population. Shachvula Aretz Chutzos Nar V'Zokain. There are bodies strewn all over the street, young and old. V'Sulasayu Bachurai Naflu Becharav. My maidens and my young men have died by the sword. And Yirmiyahu almost accuses God. Harakta biyom hapecha tavachta lo chamalta. How could it be? Well, the Sifra understands as follows. The Sifra tells a story of a person who died young, and he left a wife with a young baby. And every year, the wife, the widow now doted on the baby so that every year she would measure the weight of the baby and give an equal measure of gold to the Beis HaMikdash. Apparently, they were very wealthy. Nonetheless, when the siege was laid in Yerushalayim and they ran out of food and now there was hunger and starvation, the Sifra says she slaughtered the child with her own hands and ate him. And about her, my master, who could have imagined that such a thing would happen? And now it's not a continuation. The Sifra understands. Why are you surprised that could happen? They've already killed a Kohen and Navi in the Beis HaMikdash. Zecharia ben Yehoyada HaKohen. So the Sifra understands these psukim is referring to the killing of Zecharia. And now you understand Nar v'Zokain. The Nar is probably the Tinokot Shebeish Rabban, and the Zokain are the Sanhedrin. And B'Sulasaya Bachurai Naflu Becharav is exactly what they mentioned, the young men and the young women. Okay, that's about the dimensions of the slaughter, and that the accounting was finally brought about at the moment of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. What's this theme about the blood boiling there and not resting? That's 2 verses in Yechezkel. Yechezkel there is talking about the city of Jerusalem. He has a mashal, a parable. The city of Jerusalem is as meat boiling in a pot, and then there's a froth on top of the pot, which is all the stuff that you don't want and you want to skim away. And he says the stuff on the top stays there. And then he immediately turns to the nimshal, to what it's referring to. And he says, namely the froth on top is the blood of innocent people being killed in Yerushalayim. Namely the meat, the blood is cooking in the pot, are the people of Yerushalayim. And the froth on the top is the blood. Put it on an exposed rock, on the clean rock. He didn't even bother to give it the decency to cover it on the ground, namely, okay? And then the next pasuk says, Yechezkel continues to say, he's not speaking about the others, rather God is now speaking about himself. Lahalos chemolin kam nakam, to increase the anger and the revenge. Nasati as damal tzechiach sela. So the Shekhinah is saying, God is saying, I put the blood on the rock. Leviltihi kasos, that it never be covered. Namely, people killed so casually, they never bothered to hide it. God says, that's how it's going to stay. The stain of the sin, of the pollution of the country by murder, that will stay and not be taken away. And that indeed, that's the issue of the blood boiling, as we'll see in a second. Echa Rabba. Just a comment about Echa Rabba. We're gonna look now at 3 sources. The basic story of Nebuzaradan and inside the Beis HaMikdash is told in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in Echa Rabba, and Koheles Rabba. In Echa Rabba, it's told in 3 places, and in Koheles Rabba, it's told in 2. I'm not going through all of them. Relax. But they all start with this. Rabbi Yehuda and Shoal Rabbi Yachel. Hechon Hergues Zecharia. Be'ezras Yisrael or Be'ezras Noshim. Where did they kill Zecharia? Ezras Noshim is sort of like an antechamber to the real Kodesh, namely to where you cannot be Tameh in order to come in there, etc. The Ezras Yisrael is a step inside. He says, Amalei, lo Ezras Yisrael, lo Ezras Noshim, and neither. Elo Ezras Kohanim, still further in. You have to remember the verse in Divrei Hayom Beis says, B'chatzar Beis Hashem. It doesn't say where. He says it was in the Ezras Kohanim, and then he continues. They didn't even give his blood the consideration that we give to the blood of a kosher animal, of a kosher wild animal that is that we slaughter in order to eat. Taman Ksiv, in the Torah it's written, V'yishish mi beis Yisrael asher yatzud tzed chaya v'chisahu be'afar. There's a law of kisur hadam, not for domesticated animals. It seems the idea is that domesticated animals are meant to be consumed. So there's no special issue. But what seems to be being said here is that a wild animal is meant to be wild, and yet there's a chayat tahora that if you kill it, you're allowed to eat it. Nonetheless, you have to cover its blood. And the way this particular statement is looking at it is it's a sign somehow that what you've done is not perfect, or maybe it's just a sign of respect. But what he's saying is, when they killed Zecharia, they couldn't care less about spilling the blood, and they left it there open. Okay, and he says in the Torah it says you have to cover the blood. But here it says, this is our verse in Yechezkel. The Jewish people left the blood of innocent people killed right there. He's continuing, because of God's anger. So you see that this Chazal and Eicha Rabbah understood those verses in Yechezkel as referring to the death of Zecharia, and indeed in the issue that the blood did not disappear all those years. In fact, it was simmering there in the ground, commanding attention. The issue of this Kisur Hadam, of bringing in the issue of Kisur Hadam, it sort of seems to be giving some sort of casual behavior to the murder, but there's something more to it. When Cain kills Hevel, the Bereshis Rabbah asks, "Umi kavra," who actually buried Hevel? Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, Ofos Hashemayim v'chayos taharos kavarohu. The birds of the heaven and chayos taharos, the wild animals that were allowed to eat, they buried him. When Asan lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu secharon shtei brachos shemavorchim alehem, achas l'shchita ve'achas l'kisur hadam. If you look at the Eicha Rabbah, in terms of what we just read in Bereshis Rabbah, what Rabbi Acha has done is saying the killing of Zecharia, he understood it in terms of the murder of Hevel by Cain and Hevel. And by Hevel, what does the Torah say? God says to Cain, "Where's your brother?" Kol demei achicha tzoakim elayim min ha'adamah. That's the meaning of the business of the blood simmering and boiling through all these years. Okay, the Eicha Rabbah continues, and now we'll continue with the versions of the incident, not studying the psukim. We're in the Eicha Rabbah. We're on at the top of page 3, okay, for those who came a bit late. All right, we're in sharing, okay? The Eicha Rabbah says as follows. Sheva Averos of Ru Yisrael Sohayom. They didn't simply kill a prophet. They didn't just kill Zecharia. They did 7 horrible sins. One is Hargu Kohen, 2 Navi, the Dayan. You notice there's no such thing as a Dayan in the biblical text, but in Chazal, what you have is these three people are what? They are the institutions of religious leadership. V'shavchu dam naki. See, slaughtering the innocent person, that's a separate avera. So it means that the first three are about the institutional meaning of the murder. V'chilalu es Hashem, v'timu es ha'azara. They desecrated God's name and they defiled the azara. And the last seventh one is a twofer. V'Shabbos v'Yom Kippurim hayel. Shabbos and Yom Kippur. Okay, if you say it was Shabbos, we understand. Shabbos is such an outrageous, to be Mechalel Shabbos is such an outrageous thing that one receives the harshest of capital punishment, namely skila. What's the point of the Yom Kippurim? Point of the Yom Kippurim is the heightened irony. After all, there are two aspects to Avodas Yom Kippurim, to the service of Yom Kippurim. The kapara, the forgiveness of our sins, and of Klal Yisrael, that is affected in the Soil Azazel, what we call the scapegoat that is sent outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Everything else that we do in the Beis HaMikdash, where we bring the par and the soyer, the bullock and the goat, and we sprinkle its blood inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that has another purpose. That purpose is to purify the Beis HaMikdash from tumah. But the key is tumas mikdash v'kodesho. Okay, so that heightens the irony. We'll come back then and talk about why all of a sudden the introduction isn't the killing of an innocent person sufficient. We'll talk about that. Okay, now we'll do the version in Eicha Rabbah of the actual incident that we discussed in Masechtas Gittin. Here it starts. Okay, he saw the blood simmering and boiling, and it goes through. He slaughtered this one, that one. Finally, Amalo, Zecharia, Tovim shebe'amcho ibaditi. I killed the best of your people. Do you want that all of them are lost? La'alter nach. So finally, the blood rested. And again, there's an account here of Nebuzaradan having a moment of tshuva, but now the Kal V'chomer is not predicated on the actual sort of that one person's blood demanded so much appeasement, but rather on understanding a pasuk. Okay. And that's the mentioning of Nebuzaradan becoming a ger is not here, but rather there's a different conclusion. Look over here. Miyad nismalei hakadosh baruch hu rachamim, v'ramaz ladam v'nivla b'mkomo. So there are two stages here. One is that the blood rested, but apparently was still above ground, and therefore even though the blood had received its appeasement, the stain of the crime still remained. So God said, now the stain is now clear. The price has long been paid. Okay. So there's this new element here, this twofer, so to say. That first we have there's two stages. That first the blood rests, and then God has to tell it. All of a sudden, God is part of the story. Whereas before, it was between the blood, assuming the persona of Zecharia, and the Nebuzaradan. Now all of a sudden God brings an end to the story. Okay. Well, there's another wrinkle in the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi starts at the beginning the way we just started now. Rabbi Yehuda and Shaul at Rabbi Acha. And the thing goes on. The three dots is the same sugya in a slightly different Aramaic. V'adayin hadam toses. Adayin here is it's like an ayin. It's Palestinian Aramaic, so it's a little different. Okay, but here something comes there's a new wrinkle. Bahahu shata nazaf bey. Nebuzaradan got angry at the blood. Amalei mayad boy, what do you want? Novad kolomasachalach? For you, we're going to kill everybody? And now what does it say? Miyad nismalei hakadosh baruch hu rachamim v'yomar, etc. On, and at the very end, Miyad ramaz ladam v'nivla b'mkomo. So the blood did not want to rest on its own. And prior to this, you might have thought that Nebuzaradan was overwhelmed with mercy, or maybe with moral horror. Now it's already becoming a point that it's moral horror because he was angry with the blood. He says, "Are we going to kill everybody for you?" Okay, all right. Point is for you, and the blood doesn't rest even. It's now God who has the blood. As God is now the sole actor in bringing the incident to an end. Okay, and now the Kahelis Rabbah. Watch what happens. Now the beginning gets worked over. The beginning of the story gets worked over. The story starts as follows. Here you have dots because I was able to copy this from Zecharia, the Zecharia.com.org, and they had dots here in their version. So you're on easy street now. At motzei b'shah shalom Nebuzaradan la'achrivis Yerushalayim. Ramaz HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'oso hadam shehayihya toseis v'yoleh masayim v'chamishim u'shtayim shana min Yoash ad Tzidkiyahu. According to rabbinic counting, it was 252 years from when Zecharia was killed until this moment. Okay. Me'asu, what did they do in the Beis HaMikdash? Garfu olav kol basar v'asu kol arema v'lo nach. They piled dirt upon it constantly, and the blood kept simmering up to the top. You understand? The first people, you see, well, what's going on now is what? What's going on now is a very close reading of the verse in Yechezkel. When they killed him, they were casual. They didn't care. They left the blood there. But later generations understood what the crime was and had the guilt and tried to assuage the guilt by what? By burying it underneath. But the second verse in Yechezkel said the God is keeping the blood on top, that it will never be covered. So they are actually describing the verse in Yechezkel. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'dema. God says to the blood, Ha ansa, this is the time. The sigvei daitaki digdach. You can finally now collect your IOU. And then comes the story of all the slaughter. But also show at that moment, at a certain point in all the slaughter, but also show ba oso Russia v'zoak al dema. This Russia, this killer, Nebuzaradan, yelled at the blood, namely at Zecharia, v'amar, he said to him, Ma tava, how good are you? Uma demodidach yatirim b'dmei elain. Since when is your blood better than all the blood of all the people I slaughtered? Boyat and David kolam masach beginning. You really want me to kill the whole nation for you? Blood does not respond, doesn't rest. Again, ba'osa shah, the way we just read in the Yerushalmi, God is now filled with mercy, and now at that moment, God tells the blood to be absorbed in its place. So what's going on here? Let me stop the share for a moment. Oh, okay. Oh, there you are. Great. So what's going on here? I think what's going on is the way I've laid out the stories. I didn't lay out the story, the order in which the versions were developed. I didn't do that. Made no attempt to do that, okay? But what I did do, I laid out the stories that in themes, there was a progression, okay? In the first story, and the Gemara that we all know and study, the story is between the personified blood of Zecharia, namely Zecharia, and Nebuzaradan. And Zecharia demands to be appeased, to get satisfaction, as we say. What is that? That's the psukim. That's the verses in the beginning of Bereshis by Cain and Hevel. Kol demei achicha tzoakim alai min ha'adamah. The victim requires some satisfaction for the injury done to him, or more broadly to her. Okay. The story of Yosef and his brothers at the key moment when they're standing in front of Yosef, and Yosef challenges them that they're spies. and then challenges them that they're spies. And then they start talking among themselves. All of a sudden, the guilt of everything that they've done is coming closed in on them. And finally, Reuven says, and he says, I told you not to commit a sin with the child. You didn't listen to me. And now, what's the conclusion? The gam damo, his blood now requires an accounting. The issue in these verses describe the murder as what? As injury done to the victim, and the victim requires an accounting. Okay. But in Parshas Noach, it's a little more complicated. In Parshas Noach, after they come out of the ark at the end of the Mabul, so God now has to take in hand the issues of murder in order to produce a stable society. After all, the Mabul did not come specifically for Avodah Zorah. Torah says it came for Chumas. Okay. God says as follows: V'yachas dimchem lenafsho sechem adrosh. God takes responsibility to demand an accounting of every single person's blood. Miyad ha'adam miyad ish achiv, from every person, from everyone's brother. Kain Havel. Adroshus nefesh ha'adam. I will demand an accounting for the blood of every single human being. And then, so that's still the same theme that we're talking. But now all of a sudden, something is added. Shofech dam ha'adam, va'adam damo yishofech. God introduces something new. That if a person kills another person, it's a capital crime. And the rest of society is obligated to kill the murderer. Why? All of a sudden, a new independent consideration is brought into murder. It's not the victim being injured. It's the sacrilege that is committed against the image of God that Chavel Elokim. Okay. What I'm saying is that if you look at the stories, and if you're starting at Cain and Havel. That's where you're starting. It's the Dam Zecharia and the Vuzaradan. That's all there is. Slowly, the stories, the way I've lined them up, the stories develop to the point that all of a sudden God is the only actor. And the last Kahalas Rabbah, yeah, let me get it back for a second. In the last Kahalas Rabbah, share, here you go, right here. God is, the two actors are not the blood and God, they're not the blood and the Vuzaradan. There are only two dramatis personae, two actors in the drama here. It's God and the Vuzaradan. Some credence, some recognition is given to the personal aspect of the blood of Zecharia, where God tells the blood, now's your time to collect your bill, the IOU that is owed to you. But otherwise, everything is in God's hands. All of a sudden, we have left the personal side of it, and now the issue is now between God demanding justice, okay? And since it's between the Vuzaradan and God, it's now and the blood is actually is a moral argument is given against the blood demanding justice. Is it true that your blood is better than anybody else's? Okay. Well, so at the end, the shift in the way the story is told has emphasized God and a much broader principle than just blood receiving revenge for the injury done to it, okay? The real issue of revenge, and at least as formulated in Parshas Noach, we're not doing the philosophy, we're doing the psukim, okay, is that there's a sacrilege that has been committed against the Tzelem Elokim. So now let's look at page, it's page 5 in the PDF, but in the where I have the poem, it's page 543. Yehuda, let's read. Yehuda Halevi says, Hosif laharog noshim in yonkei shadayim. V'dam olev enehem kedam yeorei Mitzrayim. Ad nosod nevuzat adan einav lashamayim. V'yomer ha'indai ladam b'vnos Yerushalayim. Hachalo ato oseh she'eris hashivyo. V'oz shakat dam noki. V'cherev nakom revoyo. When I first saw this, I said, what's going on here? Nevuzaradan never turned to heaven. He kept speaking to Zecharia. So when I first read this, I really thought that what we're talking about here is pure poetic license. I mean, the rhymes, the meter, everything is so gorgeous. So I thought it's pure poetic license. But then once I started looking up all the different places where the story is told, it's quite clear to me at least that Yehuda Levi knew, they all knew, all these Paitanim knew Midrashim up, down, in and out. He knew the Kehelis Rabbah. And he was clearly influenced by the Kehelis Rabbah. And you have to remember that in the 11th century, Yehuda Levi was not only a literary poet, he lived in a philosophical milieu, and he himself wrote a book of philosophy. So of course, the issue of the personal element between the blood and the people, that is just pushed aside. The issue is Nevuzaradan and the Ramana Shalom and no one else. Okay, that's my understanding of I think that's the main thing in the poem that stands out, that sort of requires some explanation. I have a feeling that that's what it is. Okay, if you want, you can unmute people in case anybody has a question. If you're still there, David.
I am. Hang on. Let me unmute all.
Okay. Yitzhak, may I ask questions?
Yeah, go ahead, Yitzchak. Yeah. We got a lot of Yitzchaks, but okay.
The motif here of the Egla Arufa, which the dam is a Nahal Etan. As you know, Shadal says...
So you think Tzichiach Sela is also the Egla Arufa?
Yeah, and I think this time, since there would not Bnei Israel can take care of the murder, it cannot make tzedek, Kadosh Baruch Hu is the one who's doing it. I think there is a way to...
Yeah, that's part of it. You're perfectly correct. That's definitely part of it. But the Midrashim, the key is that the Midrashim saw that image in Yechezkel as the story. That's the point I wanted to bring up. But the Egla Arufa is definitely correct. That's very good, yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? You doing good here? Okay.
So,
yeah.
So I'm trying to understand the sugya.
Oh, I forgot one thing.
Right.
That business with the 7 sins. What's going on? It seems to me, precisely by what I emphasized, the business of doing those 7 sins. Once the story is not between the blood of Zecharia and Nevuzaradan, but rather is between God and Nevuzaradan, all of a sudden, that God demands justice for one person at the personal level from such a tremendous level of slaughter, it seems to be sort of inconceivable. I think the issue of the Sheva Averos, those 7 sins, I think that's to magnify the horror that was done on the occasion. I think that is to magnify the horror that was done on the occasion, and to broaden the issues way beyond the person of Zecharia, but rather of the violation, the outrageous sacrileges that were taking place on that particular day. Not only the murder of Zecharia. I think that's the role. Especially, it's only in the Eretz Yisrael Midrashim. It's not in Sanhedrin and Gittin. I think that plays a role in it as well. Yeah.
One could look at the quote you bring from Bereshis Rabbah, saying with Cain and Hevel that Shchita and Kisir Hadam are actually the 2 different aspects that you talked about. That Shchita is the personal revenge aspect, or the sort of the tikkun for the personal revenge, and the Kisir Hadam is for the ultimate justice.
That's for the ultimate justice. Yeah, could be. I think the context is that they take Kisir Hadam as solicitation, as being solicitous of the dead person. because that's how the Bereshis Rabbah.
Right, in that
describes it,
context. But I'm
right?
saying
In
the
that
Bereshis
context,
Rabbah
you're right.
doesn't go to Noach, right? It's before Noach.
This is
It's sort of
pre-Noah.
a precursor to both.
Yeah. Oh, could be, yeah, for sure. No problem with that. Yeah. Okay. All right, we're good? Okay.
Thank you,
All
Isaac.
right, good to see all of you.
Thank you, Isaac.
Okay.
Okay, when's the next year?
Thank you very much.
Next week after Eicha, my wife
Restoration.
is going to do it. You better be there, Isaac.
Send out an email, please.
We'll be
He's looking for you.
Okay, but I don't want such a complicated shiur. I want something that I can understand.
I'll be sure to tell her.
Okay.
What?
I'll be sure to tell her.
Okay,
He's sitting right there.
okay.
All right. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.